of you has an activity tracker? Raise your hand. Okay, and how many of you have reached over 10,000 steps today? Oh, one, two, two people who did a lot of work. Let's see what I have. I have 10,150 steps, but maybe I can do better. Let's see. I have 8,000? No, we don't take that one. I have 10,000 steps. So we're all familiar with these devices, and we use them in our daily lives, even to the point that feeling that sports is not worth it if we left our activity tracker at home. However, we are also familiar with how inaccurate they are. And this inaccuracy is not particularly important if I'm using it to motivate myself, to walk more today than I did yesterday. Although the inaccuracy plays a role if I happen to have lent it to my dog this morning. But it does play a very large role when we're looking at the healthcare outcomes for a large population. For example, to understand how motion relates to depression. Then this inaccuracy of around 2,000 steps is really problematic. And this inaccuracy is between the different devices. So different brands have different values. And often the companies have these algorithms that are proprietary, so they guard them very well. And we don't really know how accurate they are. But a few have a validation, but this validation only holds for this particular software implementation. So that annoying software update that starts every time you just wanted to use it. After that update, this algorithm is changed and the validation no longer holds. So what we need is to be able to compare these to each other. And so what we need to build is a large benchmark dataset where we can compare the algorithms of each device and see how accurate they are. So we need a large database. Maybe we can give some activity trackers to some of the audience and ask them to walk up and down the stage. But is this really how we walk in daily life? Not really. So we can send them home, give them a tracker, say, go home for a week and do what you normally do, and then come back. But how do we know what they did when they were at home? Well, we could follow them around with a camera and watch every single thing they did, although this might have a few privacy issues. But privacy issues to the side. We then have video data, and we need it to be labeled. Well, this is long and boring. We could hire some students to do it. But it's still long and boring. Alternatively, we could get some experts and ask them to label the sensor data. What I mean by sensor data is that in most of these devices, there's an accelerometer, and it measures the acceleration of your wrist. So when you see that the wrist is swinging in the data, you can assume that the person was walking during this time. And so the expert can label the data. But experts' time is still expensive, and it still takes a long time. And so this is where artificial intelligence, specifically machine learning, comes into it. We can get data from one batch of subjects and ask the expert to label these subjects. Then we train an algorithm with this data and these labels and use this algorithm to estimate the motion of the next batch of subjects. Then we ask the expert to return and look at this data and correct anything that was wrong. And so now with this corrected labels, we can retrain the algorithm and use it to estimate the next batch. And now the expert comes back, recorrects these, and now we can train another algorithm or update the current algorithm. And with each of these iterations, the algorithm gets better and better at, or more accurate as the iterations go on, and the effort the expert needs to spend gets less and less. And so we were able to begin to build a large-scale database. And this will help us when we want to validate these algorithms. This we call smart annotation, and it is a large section of my research. But this solution works for the average person. Now, we're all average, right? So, I have an expert for us averages. I'd like you all to stand up, please. Great. So, when I count to 3, I want you to jump 3 times. And when you do, I want you to watch how your neighbors jump. Are we ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so how did your neighbor jump? Did they jump exactly like you? Did they follow instructions? So, thank you. You race it now. This variability that we see in the jumping data is very small in comparison to the variability we see in data from patients with motion disorders, such as Parkinson's. One extreme case that I've worked with is called hereditary spastic paraplegia. And these patients often walk dragging their feet, or they walk on their toes. And just to walk a small distance takes a large amount of concentration. And this makes their quality of life not as high, because just to go from the couch to the kitchen to make a cup of tea takes effort. And so we need a solution for these patients. But because they are really individual, we need a model for every single patient we see. This means that if the doctor sees a new patient coming in, they would have to label data for each new patient. And this is simply impractical in the clinical setting. So we use this smart annotation approach and adapt it a little to help us. So we have seen some patients to date, so we build a general model. And then we take this model and estimate the activity of this new patient. And then we throw away the outliers and keep the main section of this data and use it to retrain the general model to be better at this particular person. And then we can keep iterating this so the algorithm gets better and better at this particular person. And so then each and every patient ends up with their own model. And in this manner, we have been able to provide the first mobile gait analysis solution for hereditary spastic paraplegia patients. And this will help doctors to understand how their motion is when they're at home and help them to adjust the medication where possible to give them a better quality of life. And when we go back to the general smart annotation model, where it was iteratively the expert was doing less and less work, we can use this to build a large-scale data set. And this will allow us to compare each algorithm from each different activity tracker brand, and see how accurate they are, so that we can truly understand the connection between motion and depression. And finally, on the day that you have your activity trackers and you decide to walk that extra mile, I hope that at the end of my research, you will be able to have full confidence that your activity tracker actually took into account the effort you put in today. Thank you for your attention and happy walking.